State. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies were stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Welcome to the Black Miss Podcast. Welcome to the Black Miss Podcast. I am your host, Too Black. All right. We are back for the third installment of this series, which is definitely not going to just be 3 episodes as we intended it to be, because that's how we work, right? So this will be the last episode on the 3 ways of the Klan, but there are some other topics related to this that we want, other history, I should say, related to this that we're going to dive into regarding white supremacy and really understanding the differences within it, and more importantly, the white power movement, which the Ku Klux Klan eventually joins after the history of this episode. But for this episode, we are covering the third wave of the Klan, and the myth here being that the KKK were men of their time. This is actually, just be totally upfront and honest with you all, this was actually a different myth when we went into the episode, but it got changed because it felt like this actually fits more the spirit of what was talked about. Because we all hear this, right, that the KKK were men of their time, or not just the KKK. We just hear this about racists in general. We hear this about, slave masters. We hear this about, even men who were, misogynist. And we hear this about all kinds of different things that today people will claim are not tolerable, even though in many ways they still are. There's several problems with this kind of framing. One, I think the most obvious, it makes it seem like people aren't responsible for their actions. So we can only condemn something by looking back. But in the time in which they existed, they were just men of their time, just people of their time. These are people who bombed homes and such. But and we all will say the Klan was bad, but it was a different time. It was the South. They had a lot of these people hadn't met Black people or whatever, right? I think also, and maybe a little bit more importantly, it individualizes people. So it reduces things down to some kind of moral code or conduct, as opposed to looking at the broader system and the way that things function in the time. We look at how people behaved, and we say it was a different time because people behaved under these kind of customs as individuals, as opposed to a system, white supremacy, that was exploiting and torturing and murdering Black people, and that's never been okay in history, and it kind of mutes the voices of people who were very critical of these things in those periods of time. It's as if we only become enlightened later on. There are some things, when we talk about science and stuff, where people do become enlightened about things later, and at the time, people really didn't have that understanding. But this is not one of those things. So. The KKK of the third wave, particularly, you might be able to say this about the second wave. The second wave had millions of people in it. It was a much more mainstream movement, as we already covered. The third wave was primarily almost paramilitary and terrorist activity, right? We're talking about bombings, talking about assassinations, we're talking about kidnappings. And these tactics are the things that ultimately lead to the to civil rights legislations and civil rights movements being somewhat successful, because the Klan was so violent. And then not just the Klan, but other organizations and individuals who were engaged in similar activities. These are the kind of things that swayed people to the side of the civil rights movement. So that they were not even successful in their tactics. Hence why, as we'll get to in another episode that's already been recorded, they had to join forces with Nazis and others and go more underground. So this idea of them being men of their time, or people of their time just doesn't really hold up. So Rasul is back to walk us through this history, and Ryan will also be on this episode to walk us through this history to demonstrate that this group existed at a time where there was plenty of pushback, and not just from the people that they terrorized, but even from white supremacists within their own ranks, and debates within that far right end of the political spectrum, and some of them within that end of the political spectrum, I should say. So although they were unsuccessful, this, as I said, this does ultimately usher in a darker period, which we'll get to somewhat at the end when we talk about the Greensboro Massacre that we're going to talk about today. But yeah, so that's the myth. As always, the longer episode will be placed on Patreon because these episodes there's just a lot of history, so they do tend to be longer than maybe we would like to put out for the general public. For the rest of you, you're still going to hear most of it, but if you want to hear maybe an additional 20-30 minutes, you can listen to that on Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, I do want to shout out the people who have been signing up. Shout out to Danita Parrish, made a great contribution, definitely appreciated. Shout out to Donovan Carver. Shout out to Robin. Shout out to shout out to Natalie Pipkin. Another great contribution was made. Shout out to all those people, and please keep signing up. So without further ado, we're gonna get into it. So then to begin, to go back a little bit further, there's a question to Rasul, and just get into the history here. After the Klan was essentially bankrupted by the IRS in 1946, which we discussed in part 2, what was its existence, if any? How did people attempt to revive it? How successful were they? Because, again, we're saying the Klan really starts to pop off again in the late 50s and 60s, but there's this lull, trying to understand what happened during that lull.
Yeah, and so I think that kind of goes back to also what we were talking about, why there's 3 ways, is because there's no continuous national organization of the Klan. It's not to say that somebody who was a member of the Klan who kept their robes didn't exist. That's definitely the case. It's not to say that maybe a handful of people who were all part of a chapter continued to try to meet in some particular way. Didn't happen. But the Klan as a national operating organization with a leadership, with dues and these types of things does not exist. And so so it only exists because somebody creates the national organization, and then of course it folds. Somebody has to create the national organization again, and it folds. And so exactly in this particular case, the Klan had already been decimated based upon a number of different things prior to World War II. The war itself sucked energy out of Klan membership, as well as, of course, the New Deal, and also the Great Depression before the New Deal. But the IRS scandal was the sort of final straw in terms of killing a national operating organization, which then meant individual people, if they had the means, attempted to gather other people. And there doesn't seem to be any evidence of any success, except for once we get around 1937, there's a news feature called the Ku Klux Klan back in South. And it was, that footage was then featured in the 1947 film that was focusing in on the first meeting since 1941 of the National Klan under a single leader structure-based organization. In this case, Samuel Green, who's a Atlanta-based doctor, is leading this particular revival, and he frames, at least within the state of Georgia, all of the disparate Georgia region clans under the Association of Georgia Clans. Similar to the second Klan, he was also savvy in terms of marketing and branding. So he sold the rights to a film of that film, but also any filming to Life magazine. And so people can get online and actually see the ceremony. And so it's not a reproduction. It's not from a movie. It is literally the actual filming of what they call a naturalization ceremony. A naturalization ceremony is where, they recite their allegiance, not only to United States, but the United States that they see as being important. Samuel Green is not able to really take it much further because he actually dies of a heart attack 2 to 3 weeks after his election as leader of the Association of Georgia Clans. So that's part of the sort of starting and stopping. Not to say it completely was decimated. I mean, now it was a hype to it, and now those individual clans, and at least in Georgia, have a banner to then meet and debate with one another about who could be the next sort of leadership to run it. And so we don't see another sort of prominent leader until Robert Shelton comes about. But what sort of brings even that on is 1954. So a similar type of a year thing, just like 1915. 1954 is the year of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which overturns Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson, for our sort of listeners, is in 1896. That separates separate but equal in all forms of accommodation and services. And so Brown versus Board of Education, while it's based upon access to schooling, it overrides separate but equal by saying segregation must be ended and desegregation must be put into effect. And that was just too much for people in the South in particular. And so it was very easy for Robert Shelton to begin to recruit people who would want to join. And so his organization is then called the United Klans of America, because this is more than just Georgia. He begins to pull from other states all around the country, such as Sam Bowers of Mississippi, Eldon Edwards, and then later Roy Alonzo Davis of Georgia, Jeff Berry of Indiana, Virgil Lee Griffith of North Carolina. These were some of the prominent leaders of state clans that decided to, I guess, give fealty to Robert Shelton's leadership. They get a membership of about 30,000 people. They don't hold major positions, but they do hold important positions like local sheriffs and preachers. Preachers are important because everyday people, see preachers as counsel and moral authority, and sheriffs are sheriffs, right? They enforce the law, and interpret the law, and apply it in these local sort of situations. And so this is one of the reasons why we sort of see both the rhetoric as well as the activities of the Klan being able to be condoned. A lot of this is we have to acknowledge the work of David Cunningham, Klansville, USA, the rise and fall of the civil rights era, Ku Klux Klan. I know you already mentioned Hooded Americanism by David Chalmers. But another piece that's actually internal to the Klan, which is, I think, also something that we didn't say in the opening, which is, our entire intent is to think about these phases through the lens of the Klan, not as a person looking upon the Klan. And so we really...
Yeah, hence why I was trying to get at when I named all those violent acts.
Right.
Hence why we just got that. We named it, we acknowledged it, it's important, but getting too much into that, we lose the point you're making of understanding it from the lens of the Klan.
Yeah, and so to understand the perspective of the Klan, now you begin to see why the need for those violent activities and why those particular locations for those violent activities, right? And so shutting down certain organizers, either scaring them or killing them, prevents then the success of whatever their work was going to be in terms of being carried out. The bombing of key sort of sites and locations either ends the operations of those facilities or scares people from going into any facility. If your church, which is also a location for meeting, it has been bombed, the other 2 or 3 churches in the area is probably going to see a dip in attendance because they don't know if they're going to be bombed during a service, during a meeting, or whatever else have you. And so
they're not going to be as likely to welcome the next civil rights group that comes down there trying to organize either, right?
Not at all. Yeah. Not at all. And so while this Klan definitely sort of is associated with lynchings, even though we don't have, like a specific sort of, like we know this lynching was orchestrated by a Klan, this Klan definitely is associated with a number of murders, a number of disappearances, a number of, violent acts of, like I said, bombing, setting fire to things. But the other text that I was getting to was the Klansman Manual in 1924, which provides the protocol for leadership, which was first sort of drafted by William J. Simmons, who was the sort of leadership of the Second Klan. What Paul Etheridge, comes behind William J. Simmons to sort of give that what was a guidebook, more of a manual feel for not only operations, but also a protocol system for structure and so forth. And I know, I said, I think in the first one, if people remember, in our audio retreat of 6 hours so far, that we were going to get to the protocol leadership structure of the Klan. And this becomes important, because these people are now in these positions. The first Klan didn't quite have all of this elaborate level of organization, and the second Klan did, but the third Klan took it a little bit further, even though their membership was less than the other 2 clans. And so people, enter in after they are initiated, into the Klan as a knight of the Klan. And that would be anybody from who held a probationary status all the way up to a senior level position. And they would have the standard looking white robes that you sort of all think about. But when you start, seeing trim of like red trim on certain parts of a robe, that may be a person who holds a responsibility like a band member. And when I say a band member, I mean literally what people may think about it as a band member, like a music band.
And as we noted in the second wave, they literally had records. So.
That's right. Exactly. And especially in the third Klan, they definitely produced a lot of records.
You telling me KKK mixtapes out there?
If they had mixtapes, they maybe 8-track,
Yeah, I put one in on the second one. Like it's edited in one of the songs. I think somebody redid it, but it's a song from
or National Lecturer. So night is a sort of entry level. There's a Kligo, and the Kligo is an important role, but doesn't hold a higher up level of authority. But the Kligo is a recruiter. He's a person who identifies who next to sort of bring in, because especially in this case, you want to be careful with who you brought in. Only true believers of the mission of the Klan and white supremacy, but you want to sort of bring into the fold.
And they were infiltrated too, right? The only thing, bro, they're actually on the list if people ever cared.
That's right. The third Klan is the Klan that was probably the most surveilled by the government of all the 3 clans. Then the next level of leadership were exalted Cyclops. Sometimes there were 2 exalted Cyclops, and they were over dens or claverns, which would be kind of loosely associated with cities. They were assisted by 2 Nighthawks who were like couriers to one, Cyclop, city to another, or some other particular location to another. Under those Cyclops, you had what was known as a Grand Magi or Lictor, who was like the second officer, Grand Monk, who was the third officer, a grand exchequer, which is a treasurer, a grand Turk, which is an executive officer.
This is very elaborate.
It is.
Hugely elaborate. So they would, basically like a clerk for a meeting. This was what a grand Turk was. A grand sentinel was in charge of the grand guards, who were like the security detail, security force. Grand ensign was responsible for like the symbols, the flags, the crosses, the care for those, or the production of them. There was a grand scribe, who was basically the secretary and records. You had ghouls, and ghouls were the people who elected the grand magi or grand monks, under the Cyclops.
Wow.
And the Cyclops always had 12 terrors.
It feels like I'm sitting in on like a clan D&D campaign, like Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, ironically, the clan really becomes inspired by things like Tolkien and so forth under the third clan.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So not necessarily like at the 1950s part, but when you get into 1970s and so forth, absolutely. And so 12 terrors, they were distinct because, of course, they still had white rose, but it was the white rose with the bolder red trim. Over the Cyclops, remember the Cyclops are over cities, you had the Grand Giants, and the Grand Giants were the people who led the provinces. And if we think about provinces, these are the counties, and they were assisted by 6 goblins, and they themselves had other sort of executive officers underneath them. And then you had the great or grand titans, who were like commanders of dominions, and dominions were like regions within the state. And they were assisted by what was known as 8 Furies. And when you see images of these sort of positions, the grand titans are the people in the red robes, all red robes. And then you had the grand dragons, which were like.
Then now we're finally getting to terms that people probably heard.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Clan was a fan of fantasy novels.
So the grand dragons were like the division level commanders of realms, and realms were states. And they were assisted by hydras and genies, and there was sometimes about up to 15 genies under a grand dragon. And the grand dragon, you can visibly identify based upon wearing like a gold or orange robe. And then on top of all of this was always one imperial wizard. And so the first clan had a grand wizard. The second clan changes all that, and it remains, the imperial wizard. Imperial wizard are the ones in the purple robes, and imperial wizards had what was known as imperial representatives for each sort of state or region. So their voice in that sort of local affairs, and imperial representatives are the ones wearing green robes. And all this was in a 1925 Klan catalog called Robes and Banners. So this is what people looked at to buy or rent these sort of outfits. So, of course, the higher up you go, the more costly these things were. And then, as we mentioned,
it's an aspiration, right? Like if you're reading a catalog, which again for younger people might be outdated. There used to be books that you buy clothes from.
If your local Gap, mailed you a booklet, right?
Yeah.
And had all the clothes for the fall collection, that's what this thing was.
Yeah.
And so because people could not make their own, that was completely.
There was not an Amazon for the Klan, No, yeah.
So you had to buy or rent it, and if it was torn, you had to not only pay a fine for the damage of that item, and then you had to buy another one. So the catalog was important, but the catalog also established the look, how it fit, and everything on. And this is what the third clan adopts, not only as a structure, but also the physical, structure. They also sort of begin to develop this notion of ideology. They're loosely building it, even though other groups have already been doing that. You sort of see this emerge under the Third Klan. And so under the Third Klan, you have this notion that they're all against the alien world. The alien world is all sort of entities, all bodies of people outside of, the Klan world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they start developing these phrases, the ways in which they can recognize each other or say certain things to each other that other people wouldn't maybe not, be aware of. So the question, "Are you a Klansman?" AYAC was a way to sort of, if you were somewhere and you were lost, or you had a flat tire and you walked to a gas station, you needed assistance by another devoted follower, and you weren't sure, you could mention AYAC, and then, of course, they would respond if they were a member.
This is the shit that makes people not take this seriously. Like, it's like funny, like they got gold robes and they say they got gang signs and AYAC. Like this is the stuff that if you didn't have the rest of the history, this is why we have these myths to some extent. Some of this is on myth, because it's just like, imagine
goblins and cyclops and
you goblins and terrors, and then somebody walks up to you and says, "AYAC." This is the kind of stuff that like, this is the guys. I'm just saying, for the people, I understand, even though most people don't know all that, the kind of what comes off, I think, is a little clownish. Times, like, it's why people will not take it seriously, and then you get, and then this stuff continues to grow because of, I don't know if that's intentional or just kind of an unintended consequence, but AYAC, yeah.
But unfortunately, all three of us are people who went to college and weren't a part of any fraternity, and so some of this is very much similar to both fraternities. What is Freemasonry in terms of, if you shook somebody's hand, where you would place your fingers or thumb, as well as the color of your shoelaces, or other things like that. Shoelaces is more things that are more modern day, now, and there's more present.
Yeah. But your point is made that there are these codes of identification amongst, like, more insular groups, I guess, a more professional way of saying it.
Yeah. Then the term sandbog, strangers are near, be on guard, was a way to say, like, hey, keep quiet. Not just that there's non-members, but there's potentially some type of infiltration around. And you had Klansmen, I greet you, which is Kiji, and then constantly applied by all real Klansmen, and in the sacred unfailing bond. The Klan sort of symbol on most robes that are like over, someone's chest or breast area. Instead of just having the cross itself, it was encircled by red, and that was known as the blood drop cross, or also the Maok, the mystic insignia of the Klansmen. And it has remained to be the primary Klan symbol even now, when a lot of Klans members don't necessarily wear robes. They may carry shields with the sort of symbol around, and there are these black lines within the cross, and you're supposed to be able to symbolically see that when you take out those lines, they form KKK. So it's the right number of lines to form 3 Ks.
And they're doing all this. You mentioned earlier, and Ryan, you got to me, like, they never had a national org, like a unified national org, right after the second wave, right? That these are, or is that what I'm trying to understand? Like, because a lot of the reading is all these disparate groups that never come under like one banner. some of that eventually later on is intentional. I know, like they had sales and stuff, but but you're saying like there was never one like unified structure, but they still follow these kind of command structures despite that.
So if we're talking about directly, after 1946 up to 1954, there is no national
Right.
governing organization, even though some of them have different levels of staying true to this manual that people they know from the Second Klan, the 1924 manual. But because Robert Shelton comes in and creates the United Klans of America, which is then the first national Klan entity since the Second Klan.
Okay. That's what I was trying to tease out. Okay.
So now they can enforce that. So now, so if in certain cases, if a certain state completely ignored having a grand giant, now they would have to have a grand giant.
Okay.
They completely overlooked the Grand Titans and they just had Grand Dragons. They had to now institute a Grand Titan rank, and then they had to identify these other particular individuals, depending upon the number of people, that you had membership. You may not have had all of these positions because this required members, right? And everybody in the chapter can't hold an office because then you don't have any general members. But
Yeah.
Under this third wave, with Robert Shelton gaining power, creating United Klans of America, were there defectors? Were there like people who are certain groups of Klan members who didn't want to fall into the fold?
Before that, there was tons of infighting. Samuel Green was only successful in organizing Georgia, which was still a huge feat. I mean, nonetheless, and so Samuel Green was similar to Bowers and other people. They were successful at least in trying to cohere separate chapters within, well, of course they're not called chapters, but dens within of their respective states. And there are other states that just still did not have a true state leader to even be in contact with a Samuel Green, of course, up until, he dies. And then when he dies, then it returns back to debate and either just being on their own as their respective states. And then Shelton comes in and, pushes the notion of being unified as a Klan. And, he meets with people and they recognize that he's not going to impose a particular will on their respective states. So since some of these people were completely being content with being their sort of state titan, or a grand dragon, they were willing to sort of go along with Shelton's leadership. And Shelton seemed to be somebody that was open to facilitating dialogue and discussions with people as opposed to just imposing it on other people. It also seems that Shelton was the lesser of the corrupt leadership of the Klan from previous clans, where the other previous clans had leadership who stole dues money and got personally rich and so forth. And so while this third Klan wasn't representative of, high class society like necessarily the second Klan, the possibility of them seeing each other as, brotherhood, being in the same thing was probably, a easier way to organize, because the person who became leadership for your local Klan was just like you. They were just the one that was chosen or voted in as the one to represent the group.
Right. Or you say somewhere?
No, I was just saying, gotcha. Like I understood.
So, yeah, a lot. There's the leadership structures is a lot.
Right.
But
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of also the Klan, while you have this, this is the Klan era that the Invisible Empire sort of phrasing or term or understanding comes about, which is kind of interesting too, because again, the previous two are the ones that have the numbers, right? But the notion of the Invisible Empire, focuses in on the secrecy, and that secrecy is part of the ways in which non-members saw the Klan. They saw them either as an annoyance, or they saw them as a nuisance, or they saw them as a particular problem. But it wasn't something that who they were attracted a lot of people who were, citizens of the United States. And so they did not seem to gain ground 1946 and 1954, and even thereafter.
And there were states, correct me if I'm wrong, that passed laws or attorney generals that really went after the Klan in this era too, right? Like, it wasn't just like black people that hated them or something like that. There were, correct me if I'm wrong, there was like actual legal attacks on them, not beyond the IRS or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably get into that a little bit later, just before Greensboro, but exactly, even, in particular, Alabama, Bill Buckley is one of the, particular attorney generals that really went out there to go after the Klan, which is surprising. It's Alabama, and he did this in his office, and I'm sure many of his staff were probably Klan members and so forth. But the thing that sort of prevents the Klan from growing between this sort of 1946 to 54 era is there happened to be a Superman radio show, 1946, and in this radio show, Superman fights the Klan. On in the show, they were called the Fiery Cross, and this was all conceived of by an internal, basically undercover journalist, Stetson Kennedy, and he basically, he hides within the organization, learns about it, and decides to form that as a basis for the story of Superman fighting the Klan. And that was what seemed to be a socially successful attempt to toward the growth and development of Klans, specifically amongst younger people, ironically. And also at the next year, 1947, the federal government places the Klan on the list of subversive organizations. And so then that also hurts.
Which is the McCarthy era, right? Like, that's what people call it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So this is why they had to be invisible, in many respects. And then also, of course, the aforementioned infighting also hurt. Just before World War II, that their attempt to begin to connect with other white power groups, even though white power yet had not been formed as an ideology or term, before so in 1940 in New Jersey, the German American Bund, which was a group of German Americans, either immediate immigrants or second generation Germans in the United States, form a Bund in support of the Nazi Party in Germany. Interestingly enough, Hitler disavowed any relationship with the German American Bund because at this time the United States was neutral and did not want to get the United States to become affiliated with the Allies. So the German American Bund struck out on them on their own, as opposed to trying to be the sort of representative of the Nazi Party.
Because they didn't want to antagonize the United States.
Not at all. Not at all. So in an attempt to strengthen their position, there were talks between the Klan and the German American Bund, which, while those groups thought that was a smart move externally with the war, that had a disastrous sort of effect upon people's perception of Klan, was especially since they had push themselves as being America first, 100% American, so forth. And so, and then of course we already talked about the tax evasion after the war. But yeah, and so I think those were some of the ways in which the American, United States public was just not sort of thinking of the Klan. So both socially and politically, they were sort of decimated.
So what were, I think another thing that might have impacted them, how does the emergence of other white interest groups, for lack of a better term, impact? how does that impact the Klan's influence in terms of this is true in a lot of history where something like in American history, especially, like you have this one thing that blows up, but then eventually there's competition. So how does like these other groups that might pop up of different politics, like maybe impact their ability to like be the go-to for whatever they loosely stand for,
Yeah, some of the groups that emerge were the National Economic Council. So National Economic Council was formed in 1931, and they were part of several different groups that are advocating for the sharing of the wealth campaign. They were basically all pro-fascist, entities, but they saw the need to one way in which, 100% Americanism could become what it is by white people not being poor. And so, those who were wealthy needed to give up their wealth for the sake of the cause.
Which is, that's always interesting just because, again, there was always this, like you've talked about before, there was this tinge of progressivism.
Right.
We got at progressivism wasn't what we understand progressive to be today. That distinction matters. But there was this some poorly minded white leftists call today economic populism. There was these like kind of populist elements to some of their politics, like you said, like, well, let's redistribute the wealth to white people. I mean, even it was all, but it wasn't really real other than the name, but even like the National Socialist Party or whatever, right? Like these tendencies about like economic distribution among whites existed as well. Like the way we might think of them as hardcore right wingers,
Right.
doesn't fit as neatly in that era. Yeah.
I think that's really important point, and I'll get back to naming some other organization names because I think, again, our sense of the political continuum of left, center, right, again from the French political system and so forth, is not a correct way of thinking about white power at all. Depending upon their ideology and what they want to sort of attempt to do, places them on the continuum, but they're not all on the far right. Exactly. They're not. Some of them are actually on the left, because it does, left that has nothing to do with sympathy for Black people and sympathy for people who have disabilities and queer folk. That's not what the political continuum was created for. It was to create a sense of, should we have greater government involvement, or should we have lesser government involvement and more individual rights? That's what the political continuum is all about. And so exactly, some of these groups, and this is why some of these groups also disagree with one another, is because while they were all, white power, again, white power is not yet a term, doesn't, they were not in agreement with how to sort of engage with that.
Ideologically, right? Yeah, like
Exactly.
right? Yeah. Like, because there's one thing to say, I mean, not to compare us to them, but I'm just saying, so that caveat very strong, not to compare us to them, but I'm just saying, even within like Black people, everybody can say they love Black people, and how that is expressed can go anywhere. Some of those, you can be somebody that says that and you believe Like Clarence Thomas, if you agree what he says, Clarence Thomas believes, at least in on paper, that Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court justice, that he believes in this very small government. He thinks that's the best way to self-determination. Yeah, that's his position. I obviously don't agree with it, but then you listen to I don't know, Paul Robeson, right? Like you're not gonna get the same. Who's a communist? Like you're not gonna get the same view, even if they love black people. Now you can argue all day whether they love black people, but that's not really the point. It's just you can have a affinity for a group of people and have totally different politics about what to do about it.
Yeah, if we were going to place and say that black respectability politics, which is not really a politic, even though people that's a term, and let's say Afropunk, if both of these things were politics, black respectability politics would be on the right, and Afropunk would be on the left.
One side pulls up his pants and is very clean cut. The other side has piercings everywhere, tattoos, and
Alternative is black or whatever.
That's right. So to be caught up into some notion of the far right, really obscures, a sense of what this is, what this means. This has nothing to do with, again, something all coming from the far right. Just because there is a racial component to one's political ideology doesn't place a person, place an organization on the right at all. And so another organization, Silver Legion of America, was formed in 1933 in Asheville, and they were pro-Nazi, go figure, in terms of the South. The American First Party was founded in 1943, and it would later convert to being the Christian Nationalist Party, which is important because they're pretty much the precursor to what we know of today as Christian nationalism. So again, started first as American First Party, then Christian Nationalist Party, and then Christian nationalism eventually takes off. The National States Rights Party was formed in 1958 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Does not to be confused with like the Mississippi States Rights Party. This is not the same thing at all. And so the National States Rights Party was founded by Edward Reed Fields, who was a chiropractor, and he was a person who really believed in J.B. Stoner, whose name is going to be later important, but was the lead perpetrator of or orchestrator of the 1958 Bethel Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham. And also the National States Rights Party was the first to establish international connections as early as the late 50s, 60s. So Finland, Belgium, the UK, they all began to, form some, political sort of positioning in a similar fashion. What it would look like would be different, of course, in the UK because there's not states, or in Belgium or in Finland. Nonetheless, they were formed. Same year that they formed, they bomb a Jewish temple in Atlanta. That's like their first act, their first opening act of action.
I do have a quick question because I'm stuck on that the white power, right? And then how the political continuum doesn't necessarily equate to the ideology, and there's certain tensions within that. I won't say group, but in those groups, right? Those fissures, some of those still exist today. Because I'm thinking about in terms of how Charlie Kirk ended up shot, and everything, and then I'm thinking about all these. There's some of those tensions and still everything. Is that just a continuation of that, or is completely a whole different context today?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ryan, because again, I think that might be what some people who were listening to the first and second were waiting on, like, when are they going to mention this? When are they going to mention this? That type of thing. And unfortunately, I'm going to
mention it hardly ever. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so unfortunately, I'm going to have to still sort of delay people's anticipation because, yet again, it's not something that plays a part in that way, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think once we sort of finish this sort of this wave, and now you continue to sort of see the Klan in a particular light, but then what forms as white power and how it's expressed, if we get to, actually doing a fourth episode, I think that will make it more clear because in actuality, when you start going into those organizations that form the basis of white power, such things like Turning Point and so forth don't even register. They don't. They're not even. Not that I'm not trying to say that they're not important. People can sort of have their own perception of their importance or whatever else, but they are not a factor in terms of the overall schema of organizations and the type of expressions of ideology and so forth that form white power. But the next group is important in forming the basis of white power, which is the American Nazi Party in 1959. George Lincoln Rockwell. He's important because he's one of the earliest that provides or creates literature that people can sort of read. He's the author of the White Power book, even though it's published after he's killed. He's killed by a member of the American Nazi Party. But that's another key organization. But before he's killed, George Lincoln Rockwell actually snitches on Edward Reed Fields, who I just mentioned, part of the National States' Rights Party, because National States' Right Party was beginning to form the sort of structures of a government takeover. So what you begin to see is anti-United States government sort of ideology developing during this period of time. So George Lincoln Rockwell is concerned about the National States Rights Party activity and it being harmful for all these other groups. And so he tells the feds, and Fields gets arrested.
That's important again, because when we talk about like this idea of everybody being far right, or as we'll get to in part 4, like you said, we're not going to touch on too much now, them being literally explicitly anti-government, anti-state, in ways that they weren't, like you just named, you have very different views. So the idea of overthrowing the government wasn't necessarily the impetus of a lot of those organizations like they might become later on, because there were, again, legitimate disagreements, like we were saying. And then to that earlier point about the turning points, not to get too much on that, but I think we'll probably get into this more too as well. Like I think a lot of this stuff, just like left shit, quote unquote left shit gets co-opted by liberals, and like a lot of the white supremacist stuff gets co-opted by conservatives, and like and we'll really get into that in the next one, but a lot of that stuff gets co-opted, and we could even argue laundered by the more establishment groups, to the point where some of those groups may not even be able to tell that's what's happening, but that is a thing where
or some of the attempted assassinations on some of those right-leaning launderers has been the activities of actual real anti-government far right
and there's a long history of that, actually. Yeah,
long history. Because again, I just mentioned that George Lincoln Rockwell, who forms the American Nazi Party, and it's growing. It's becoming a dominant thing, and it's headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, and that's important because the Klan takes shape. And I know that's another question we'll have about the locations of the Third Klan, but Virginia becomes a very important state in its development, and so George Lincoln Rockwell grows up in that sort of Third Klan sort of environment to form the American Nazi Party. And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, is that his development of the American Nazi Party is cut short because Petler, John Patler, who was actually a Greek immigrant, but was felt that he had a greater affinity to white Anglo-Saxon Protestant-based sort of identity, became a important propagandist for the org, creating its magazines or heading up its bulletins. And unfortunately, as Patler disagreed with Rockwell's sort of strident, like we're only trying to provide education, we're not trying to engage in action, like pull back. He had disagreements along those lines. Some cases, Patler also felt that Rockwell left him out because Patler was several times arrested and thrown in jail for some of his activities. And also additionally, Rockwell was suspected of having an affair with Patler's wife. And so Patler shot and killed, George Lincoln Rockwell. And so the leadership of the American Nazi Party, the sort of key charismatic leader, dies.
What year was that?
His assassination,
Mm-hmm.
19. I'm trying to look at my notes here. I think it's late 1960s.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I couldn't. I didn't have that one down, but yeah, I figured it because didn't Rockwell?
Yeah.
We were talking about that. I think you and I were talking about that the other day. But didn't Rockwell met with the Nation of Islam?
Right. Rockwell is the person who,
Yeah.
has meetings with the Nation of Islam, and he takes Patler with him to the meeting with the Nation of Islam.
Yeah.
And so, I think the other particular, key parts of this, which connects with a lot of different things. Again, Patler was both a rival, a student, all the different types of terms you could sort of come up with, both in terms of partnerships or being subservient to Rockwell all throughout this time. But with Rockwell, one of the key boycott activities that Patler was helping with the propaganda for was boycotting the 1961 film Exodus. And the film Exodus is actually about the formation of the state of Israel in Palestine. And this is a Hollywood-based movie. Paul Newman is in it. I forgot her name, but she was like in one of the James Bond movies, I think Anne-Marie Saint or something like that. It was a major movie. And they boycotted it, but why they boycotted it is because this is also the time period that the formation of Zog as a sort of concern, Zog being Zionist occupied government. And so they felt that this was just propaganda from the Western states, which is where they felt that Jews had a control over, and which included also Hollywood. So they needed to do a counter propaganda campaign against Hollywood. And so, again, we don't need to go so far away from, but the Klan is so sort of like, important in some cases, again, because Rockwell comes up in a Virginia Klan sort of base or foundation. If the Klan had not grown in Virginia and provided some type of focus of white power or white separatism in the area, George Lincoln Rockwell wouldn't be inspired to then create the American Nazi Party. So this is where we begin to see these blurrings begin to happen, these connections. But again, George Lincoln Rockwell also is author of the White Power book. And then the last group, in terms of answering this question about other interest groups, white interest groups, the Sons of Confederate Veterans was actually established in 1896. And but it was still in operation all throughout this time and still exists. And they're also an important entity that's preventing the Klan being the only focus. People had these other outlets if they cared to move forward with some type of action besides just their own personal feelings or attitudes.
Yeah, so as you established, there's a whole lot of there was a whole lot of competition. Again, this is important for a variety of reasons, but one primarily because, again, people, when we think about this era of the civil rights, it's like Bull Connor, the Klan, right? And we're going to make any distinction between them. I mean, Bull Connor did work with the Klan, like he would let the Klan like go in and beat people up before the police showed up and stuff like that. I don't believe he was ever an official member, but there was coordination. But other than that, if you have a little bit of sense of history, maybe the White Citizens Council that emerges, but that doesn't emerge to your point about 1954, that emerges literally in response to that, like 2 months after the whole Brown versus Board, the White Citizens Councils start to emerge. I believe the first ones in Mississippi. And they had more of an economic boycott approach. They did violence as well. But so just to show that, again, that point about political spectrums and also just about tactics. And if people want to call all of this white supremacy, then we need to understand that white supremacy does not just it expresses itself through one organization or one style or even one tactic or strategy. It just doesn't do that. And even within again, I'm generically calling this the right. We've already clarified this is much more messy than that. But for the people that think of it, even within the so-called idea of the right or let's just say white power, there's just way more diversity, ironically, then, people might be willing to attribute. And that's what I was saying earlier at the beginning of this whole, the overt racism that we use, a covert, overt, doesn't really hold up, honestly. Because even when you think about the Klan, they literally wear masks. So is it really overt?
Right.
Like they actually wear masks. So is that overt? Because if they were really overt, then they would not wear masks, right? So, I mean, even that doesn't quite line up, right? Versus the White Citizens Council, and in some of the groups that Rasul named, like American Nazis, like these people, like Rockwell didn't wear any masks,
At all. Yeah.
So I'm just saying the overt covert thing is a good beginner explanation for people to understand this stuff. But once you really get into it, that binary, honestly, I think I'm starting to see, especially after studying this stuff, is really not. It's really not sufficient to understanding, the way that this operates. It's just not,
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that we really have gotten white supremacy so wrong. And again, I know, it'll be more relevant to have a more focused discussion on the definition of white supremacy for our fourth one, because
right,
we kind of move past the Klan. Because I think, even though we have to discipline ourselves not to try to jump, if we talk about it now, it maintains the notion that the Klan somehow is the primary, synonymous image of white supremacy, which, not really, at all, And so when we think about the Klan growing, outside of Georgia and particularly the Holy City, and the Holy City, of course, is Atlanta. So, regardless of what what Black people want to call Atlanta, the Klan calls Atlanta the Holy City.
First city overall.
North Carolina becomes one of the major hotbeds outside of Georgia, with some of the largest Klan membership. And in a sense, it's even nicknamed Klansville, USA. Grand Dragon Bob Jones is one of the key people who grows the membership to 10,000 members in just 3 years. So again, this is the importance of that protocol structure that we just went through, because not only is that structure what grants people, roles when they come into the organization, it also is the way in which things can get done. Mississippi becomes another important location for Klan activity in a number of different cases, inspiring state-level organizations, creating state-level organizations, working with non-Klan members on those state-based organizations. And this is why some of the, more horrendous activities that we see emerge, such as particularly the 1964 murder of, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, which is more than just a murder. They were
missing.
they're admitted, their bodies were missing, dumped in a sort of earthen levee, and their car was completely burned and then put into some obscure forest area. The FBI had to conduct I think it was like almost a 3-week search for the bodies and so forth.
I mean, and that was practically all summer, right? Like that they were missing. Like they just kind of disappeared for a few days. Yeah.
And again, to our point about the differences in ideology, this really pissed people off in the Klan because this attracted too much attention. Because it's out the news that these 3 people were missing.
That's different than just a quick murder that might just be like that has time to build. Yeah,
and then afterwards, it becomes a stain on the memory of Mississippi, which Mississippi still has. You have the famous paint by Norman Rockwell of the killing of these 3 civil rights workers when he finally is free of his newspaper, role that was confining him and preventing him from like drawing pictures that were tied to these issues. Once he was free, this was like one of the first pieces that he creates that's in honor of those 3. Florida was a key sort of state. It was also part of the early 1940s sort of development, but especially in the 1950s, Orange County in particular. Florida was one of the states in which there was a lot of rank and file members throughout, not just law enforcement, but also in business as well as elected officials. So it was pretty thorough in Florida, even down to Miami. Alabama, of course, was an important, hotbed for the Third Klan, as we've already talked about and alluded to. Every single city in Alabama, Birmingham was just some of the locations which the more successful violent acts occurred. And so I think that just needs to be sort of mentioned in that regard.
I'm sorry, was there more on?
Oh, I was going to say, so I think you already mentioned Viola Liuzzo, who was murdered, white woman from Detroit who was working on voting rights, was killed dropping off a black co-worker. As far as we know, there was no, relationship. Who cares if there was between the two? Nonetheless, it was a drive-by shooting, literally. And she died immediately. And what I understand from the story is that he remained alive because when they walked by the car to look in, all of her blood from her, shooting, and because I think they shot her in the head and elsewhere, fell on him. And so he dropped down to her lap. And so when they walked past, they saw blood on both bodies and they left. And that's the only reason why he lived, was unfortunately because of her death. And then Virginia, as I already mentioned, Bill Hendricks was the Grand Dragon of Florida, and he wanted to grow the Klan in Virginia. And so in 1965, the United Klans of America sends Marshall Carnegie of North Carolina to organize in Virginia. And they grow up to about 2,000 members by 1966. And in particular, Richmond and Norfolk, in particular, were watched by the FBI for the level of activities that they were engaged in. And there was a specific black church that was bombed in Richmond in 1966. The Klan, Third Klan was everywhere, but these are the locations towards the early part of the Third Klan. When we get to the later part of the Third Klan, the Klan is in California, Oregon, Washington, uh, Texas, and so forth. But during this early phase, these were some of the key states for growing it.
I'm going to ask about Indiana just because it comes up in,
Mhm.
people's popular memory or what they think is their memory. So is Indiana, what is it? Do you have anything on Indiana? Was it influential at this time in terms of this era of the late 50s, 60s?
Yeah, sorry, Indiana. No. So I mean, even though the grand dragon of the state was important for being a part of the supporters for Robert Shelton leadership, it wasn't like he was representing a massive organization. The Klan in Indiana had completely taken a hit because of the DC Stevenson fiasco, but also how well the journalism in coming out of Indianapolis covered all of that. And then, of course, when DC Stevenson snitched on everybody and gave up the entire membership rolls, people lost or left all of their posts. And so by this particular point, either people had, left-leaning people who weren't tied to any, of these groups, or they had, just standard, bill racists, who were there, not necessarily ones that were part of any major organization running it. And so Indiana did not play a major factor role in any regards, but Illinois did have a major sort of Klan activity up until when the American Nazi Party really grew in Illinois.
Okay. Ryan, I know you read some of the Almanac. Did there any questions you had one to ask on Indiana? If any.
Well, actually, I mean, I don't have anything specific to Indiana, but I was kind of going to ask actually like a little bit of a question in you explain how each location went to each state, how they formed and everything. But I know the third wave happened primarily during the 1950s and 1960s and everything, but in this, coming as a backlash against the civil rights movement and everything, what else helped fuel the rise? Was that just the civil rights movement, or was it just anything else that's like any other factors?
Yes, absolutely. Robert Shelton and
Good
Bob,
question.
Robert Shelton and Bob Jones were called in
Mhm.
for a congressional hearing in 1965,
Mhm.
and based upon the activities of the Klan, and Congress was trying to snuff out that activity because it was,
Mhm.
it was horrendous, right? In terms of the level of activity, even if some people might not really have cared for Black people, it was just, completely out of hand. I mean, it's one thing just to want Black people to be servants, and it's a whole nother thing to blow them up.
Yeah. It's one thing to
Mhm.
not want to live next to them. It's another thing to
Yeah.
four good little girls. Yeah.
And so Bob Jones and Shelton, Jones and Shelton both feel betrayed by the United States, and this begins the sort of anti-government slant of the Klan. They felt that, and I think there's a recording of Bob Jones in an interview stating, uh, you know, speaking live, his sort of thought of, you know, what society am I in that doesn't see these things as an issue? And
Mhm.
if it doesn't see these things as an issue, then I'm just paraphrasing these things as an issue, then this might not be the right society. He's literally saying this, in an interview by ABC or CBS after the congressional hearing. So that changes their whole activity. They become way more violent even after that. After that. So even though they had already been violent, they go completely in another direction. This is also interesting because this is the point in which J. Edgar Hoover, had to decide who was the worst. Because now he's getting phone calls from LBJ, so forth. Like, you got to do something about this, and so J. Edgar Hoover switches from seeing the civil rights organizations and their leadership as the un-American group, and then the Klan becomes the major focus of it. And from doing this work here, it has led me to actually sort of consider the thing, especially when you look at the timing, is that COINTELPRO actually begins with the Klan, as opposed to it beginning as a focus on Black-based organization. Now, it's not to say that
it began as a focus on communists in 56, right?
Well, there are the signs of the FBI investigation, even before FBI forms on the, Marcus Garvey, UNIA.
Right, I'm just talking about COINTELPRO specifically started as a investigation into the Communist Party.
Yeah, and in terms, so that you have then that connection with the American activities and the Communist Party, but the actual sort of the intricacies of the entire organization, the ways in which COINTELPRO operates, begins with the Klan. So everything that we see later in terms of the fake letters, the fake propaganda, they start doing that in 1965. So you actually have fake.
So you're saying that phase of COINTELPRO that eventually is used on the Black liberation struggle, you're saying those tactics begin
with the Klan.
Oh, okay.
So not just in the investigations, the actual ways in which they deal with these organizations actually starts with the Klan, which it kind of blew my mind, because again, I'm looking at the time periods and I'm like, wait, this is way before this letter, and this is way before this, and
there wasn't even a Black Panther Party in 65, and as we know, the Black Panther Party wasn't even originally on the scope of the FBI when it was first formed.
No.
Not 2 years later, yeah.
So some of the postcards, that they would send to Klan, just regular Klan members, the Knights level, the postcards would have the drawings, and it was have the question, which Klan leaders are spending your money tonight? And it would have a depiction of a Klan member gambling or in a brothel or something like that. Or another sort of mailing that they would send to Klan members was, if you receive this, then everyone knows you're in the Klan. Because, of course, people wanted to keep their identity and association in secret. And
was it specifically because of the anti-American, anti-government sentiment that landed them in the scope of COINTELPRO?
Yeah. I mean, it was already building from
the
40s and the 50s, where they were being put onto lists. So so some of these politicians who were part of calling for them to be put on lists are still active politicians, right? And but again, of course, the Klan is not doing itself any favor by the level of violence and activities that they're engaging in as well. And so, and so in particular, David Cunningham yet again contributes some of this information, and I think he's the only one I've seen even covers it in the book called "There's Something Happening Here: The New Left, the Klan, and the FBI Counterintelligence." He's the only one that I've seen so far, not only to cover this era in this way, but also specifically the case of COINTELPRO, the hate program, HATE program, and And so in many ways, again, when I look at the time period, it seems to be the tactics of what we associate with COINTELPRO actually begin with the Klan activity.
It's a good catch, yeah, because I think we've all looked at the documents and saw the Klan's name on there, and I think we just kind of shrug it off because we know J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was a racist, and forget he was like there's no one's discounting that, but but in many ways worse than the Klan. But it is interesting to note that yeah, those tactics, because they were thoroughly infiltrated, right? Like the Klan was thoroughly infiltrated. Something we're going to talk about a little bit later, probably to close out on it. We'll talk. There was literal government agents in this incident. We'll get to soon.
Or people flipping and going in a route because one, they join. A lot of people join these things, not necessarily in the Truman.
Haphazardly.
Yeah. It's not in the way that Truman joined it, which was he didn't have a political future without joining the Klan. In this case, some people joined it because, if you're in some location in, in the South in a regular city, you're not a part of anything. And so you're part of an organization. And if you're just coming together and you're doing chants and you're talking in a derogatory way about some particular group, that's one thing. But it's a whole nother thing to then be in a car that then fires upon, shoots and kills people or disappears people or chop them up and dismember them and dissolve their bodies and blow up. That's a whole nother thing. And so you have constantly members becoming informants because that's not what they signed up for. They signed up for the spitting on, the cursing out, and that type of thing. They did not sign up to be a murderer.
Yeah. It also shows that there's levels to it, right? Like that's another way racism gets flattened. So, there's different levels to it. So, like, everybody's not interested in being a terrorist.
Another surprising thing that I sort of saw in coming up with this was the influence of the Korean War, and one of the key influences that I didn't even realize was that the Deacons for self-defense, they were veterans of the Korean War. And so not only are they talking about arms based upon their military experience, but specifically during the Korean War, when American prisoners were captured as POWs, Chinese and North Korean camps, in the Chinese and North Korean camps, there are actual Ku Klux Klan groups that would be formed amongst the POWs in those camps to either single out the black troops and get the black troops to be punished or tortured by their Chinese or North Korean captors, or to silence other white troops because what was happening in the camps was that they were being indoctrinated to see communism as a new way. So before they were ever going to be physically harmed, they were being educated. And so some people were flipping. Some people were like, well, I didn't think about it this way, that way, and that type of thing, because they actually had education programs in those camps. And so the Ku Klux Klan groups that then formed in those prisoner of war camps then would either, maybe do something to their fellow, American troop, their soldier that was with them, or they would try to make them or prevent them from seeing the conversion as a logical end. And so and so I never put those things together. So in as many cases, the Deacons for Self-Defense not only brought their military experience, but they also, some of them probably actually saw this or experienced this.
So that's interesting. That is very interesting. So at the same time, certain veterans, like especially black veterans, like the Deacons Defense, or even like Robert Williams, right, take a lot of their training and use it, for in the States against, these white supremacist structures, racism, and everything. On the other side, the flip side of that, a lot of these white boys were coming in using their training and everything, being indoctrinated from what anti-communist sentiments, and you bring it back to their perspective homes and everything, right?
No, no. Well, I mean, I
No.
think that's a piece
Or
that's a piece that really comes from the Vietnam era, and
okay.
that's the
Okay.
thing
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think Baloo really speaks to. But
Mm-hmm.
with Korea, what I'm saying is
Mm-hmm.
when there are actually prisoners of wars in Chinese and North Korean camps, they would cease being U.S. soldiers and they would form actual Ku Klux Klan groups in the camp
To resist this,
to resist the indoctrination,
yeah, quote unquote. Yeah.
communist teachings in the camp.
Okay.
And so if you were going to be with the program, you would go along with the Klan's argument and maintain, or the Klan group did things to, either prevent you from continuing to be on this earth or present you in a negative fashion to the Chinese and North Korean captors that then resulted in certain harmful actions to those prisoners. So I'm saying literally while they are in action, having been captured, uh, they become unofficial Klan groups in the actual camps.
Okay.
And you're saying that the Deacons for Defense witnessed this phenomenon, possibly,
Yeah.
and that informed, like they likely informed their work when they formed here in the States, right? Yeah.
That's right. Because, I mean, I always ask the question why, in a certain location. So, Black veterans of the Korean War were all everywhere throughout the entire country. So, why are they forming a Deacons for Self-Defense just in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia?
Mm-hmm.
Why, and so it's not because there's no other activity that's happening elsewhere. No, like there's something that's calling for the need for that specific type of action that pulls from that skill set, but also it's triggered by an understanding of the level of what these people would do.
Are capable of. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some interesting connections, that and even the COINTELPRO point. I don't think those are gems. I don't think people have made those connections on anything I've read. Why were their tactics, this is speaking of the Klan, ultimately unsuccessful in preventing the formal end of Jim Crow? Like that was their stated goal. Now, like Ryan raised, and there were more than just it was. I think it's a little oversimplified. It was just about the civil rights movement. Anti-communism is a thing. This is the Cold War era. That is also a thing. But in terms of, I'll ask the question because I was thinking about those connections internationally. But in terms of ending Jim Crow, why were they unsuccessful ultimately in terms of preventing the end, of Jim Crow?
Yeah, well, one, the level of violence was just so pronounced. And so I mentioned I was going to get back to J.B. Stoner, who ran the National States Rights Party. First, before he ran the National States Rights Party, that eventually Reed Fields, takes over. He actually recharters a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan in Chattanooga in 1942. So, he's part of that wave of people who starts the Klan and later forms their own organization. J.B. Stoner alone was responsible for the 1958 Bethel Baptist Church bombing. He was a person that was a part of it. He was also part of the attempted bombing of the Temple Beth El in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1957. He was he was responsible for the bombing of the Temple Emmanuel in Gastonia, North Carolina in 1958. The Jewish Community Center in Nashville, Tennessee in 1958. Temple Beth El in Miami, Florida in 1958. Jacksonville Jewish Center and a Black elementary school in 1958. Another Temple Beth El in Birmingham, Alabama in 1958. The temple in Atlanta that I mentioned already earlier in 1958. and then the congregation on Shai Emeth in Peoria, Illinois in 1958. So one, you get a sense of a person's movement activities, but that's just one person who was responsible for either those bombings or the attempted bombings, alone. So that level of violence was just not successful in building a support base, and it also attracted high levels of federal government activity. Not to say that federal government was doing a similar thing as the Force Acts period,
Definitely
but
not.
yeah, but the federal government definitely
They did revive some of those, though. They actually,
yes,
yeah, they did revive some of those to do. Yeah.
they revised it in particular for the Liozzo case, in terms of her murder. They brought back the third Enforcement Act to attempt to send the culprits to prison, which none of them, they all got off for her murder. But a third particular point that I think some people also may not realize, besides the COINTELPRO connection, the Korean War connection, which also answers this question about unsuccessfully preventing Jim Crow, is that oftentimes we have said that many of us have said that more politically, that the rebellions that were happening in the cities were the main reasons why civil rights legislation was passed. But when you start looking at the level of activity and violence of the Third Klan and the response by some of these members of Congress, it could be thought of as that it was the rebellions and the Klan activity that pushed for the civil rights legislation. So it was never any of the civil rights-based organizations and their work. But I'm also saying that it wasn't just, the rebellions, like,
Right.
because oftentimes people, would allude to that, King would come in and say, you have to deal with me, otherwise you have to deal with those rebellions. Now, we have no evidence of that point being said, but we do have evidence of federal government reacting to the Klan and seeing then this legislation as a way to snuff out the Klan. And so this is one of the reasons why this legislation, we see so many different acts being put into effect in a row to sort of suppress the Klan. Actually,
Yeah.
the Klan becomes the Klan becomes so anti-government. I was trying to remember one of the exact points that Bob Jones says from North Carolina, after the congressional hearing. He says that, it seems that the United States now is the babysitter of communists and integrationists. And so this is what he says after the hearing. So I was trying to remember what the phrase was, but that's literally what he says on live TV. But that also is part of why they were unsuccessful. And I think those things, as far as I'm concerned, are probably the things that prevent it from formally sort of being unsuccessful with preventing the formal end of Jim Crow. Their violence was successful in dealing with people, but their violence was not successful in sort of influencing people. Which
Okay.
They weren't able to inspire, which is a big part of, especially when we get later to the white power. They're trying to inspire other people to act. And there's this way that level of violence is alienating. And then I think another thing to kind of add is we've talked about it many times on this show, and we wrote about it. I got two things really, but first is the images. This is also on TV. This is also at a time where media,
every single thing.
This isn't just like newspapers or even just radio. Like this is all at it's emerging at a time, where this is filling time on TV. So millions of people watching this around the world, not just in the United States. And we did mention communism, but this is also, part of the United States is trying to outcompete the Soviet Union and that whole bloc. And these kind of actions are an impediment to the world over to your side, right? Like these kind of actions are an impediment to winning the newly,
So,
you know,
so it looks bad on the international stage, right?
yeah, like you can't
Okay.
you can't say democracy and capitalism are a good thing and you got this kind of shit. So it becomes that's
Makes
why
sense.
Johnson has to tell Hoover to get on it, because Johnson's also, you know, you're fighting Vietnam eventually here, right? So because that's literally a war on communism, right? So you can't afford to have that kind of turmoil at home. I mean, there again, we've talked about this. This is even in our Laundering Black Rage. We note a lot of these instances where the United States had to take precautions to, you know, to move integration forward. Now it wasn't moving fast enough. It was doing it in piecemeal ways. Like that's a whole other conversation. But it did feel the need to have some like peace, like or at least the appearance of peace. And you can't have that when you have foreign diplomats coming in who are getting like harassed in Virginia or Maryland by, you know, racists. Like you couldn't have this. So these kind of like just over like the Klan blowing up churches and like this is making news everywhere, and it undermines the national security of the United States. It undermines the actual position of the United States it undermines imperialism in many ways for it to be a ban. So you can't have some you know, rednecks blowing up people and like you can't.
Right. It kind of lifts the veil off of imperialism.
Yeah, like at a time when
things are off the rails.
At a time when you were in a worldwide competition to demonstrate that your system is what people need to adapt, and you have that happening, it just doesn't. It doesn't work right. So like that's another factor that I think is always kind of a cloud over anything when you look at the civil rights movement. It emerges at a time when that was important. And then last point, we wrote this is something in our book about, you were talking about the Deacons for Defense, but there was an incident. I'll just read. It was during a protest in Bogalusa, Louisiana, where white citizens were beating a black teenage girl, that a member of the Deacons was forced to shoot one of her attackers 3 times to defend her and his fellow deacons. Instead of the massive black genocide that many nonviolent proponents always imagined would break out following the use of self-defense, the shooting actually pressured the Department of Justice to finally shut down a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. Despite all the violence that preceded, this is the first time during the movement the government intervened to put an end to the Klan. Similar to the Birmingham riot, it took violence to prompt a forceful government response. With these eye-opening experiences, plus the natural cause of Black Power, new attitudes were seeping to refresh the political blocs. That was a short story, but that was the first time that the actual states attorney, the Department of Justice actually comes down and intervenes. Not just sends troops to protect people, not just you know, like investigates. They actually intervene, and they threatened all the businesses that were connected to the Klan. If you go look at this history, they threatened everyone in the area because Johnson was horrified at the idea of the Deacons fighting with the Klan. So to your point, Rasul, about that kind of both sides of it, that's just further evidence that there was real fear of an actual race war breaking out. The government had no interest in that actually occurring. There's no evidence of it, that they wanted a full force race war break out. And that was the fear that, you know, again, that story is crazy because the Deacons, a little girl gets dragged, the Deacons actually shoots a shot in the air, and the white folks don't stop moving towards them. so then he is forced to shoot someone after that who's about to attack him, and he saves the girl, and the rest is history. But yeah, like that was the first time the Department of Justice actually comes down and takes a direct involvement in it. So that's just another example of how, if I think there is a legitimate thing to think about, that concern that the violence is in and of itself, and just the general, like, I guess not just lack of peace, because that doesn't, just the instability threatens capital, you know, especially era. I think this era, capital seems to enjoy instability a little bit more. but the instability really threatened capital at that time, and it just wouldn't, it wasn't something that they were interested in. I think even with now if you had a segregationist government at the time, I'm talking about like very openly pro segregationist, maybe you get a different thing and they think that they, can beat communism a different way or whatever. But in this particular context, yeah, you had to have a certain calming.
So in this particular instance, the interest of the U.S. and the interest of even the civil rights movement kind of like converged in this particular,
I mean,
just this particular instance.
Yeah, that's what Derek Bell famously called interest convergence, which is my first introduction really to any of these politics in terms of the Soviet Union having the anti-communism playing a role in how the civil rights movement was able to successfully like get some things done. And I think sometimes, I don't want to go too far off the point, but when people are wondering why there's an inability to progress certain things today, they don't really factor in that aspect that helped progress the civil rights movement in the first place. And you don't really have a dynamic today where the United States is competing in that way, even if it is in a war with China or whatever, like not in that capacity where you're trying to, win over the world. Nah, not in the same way. So,
right.
So yeah, I just think that's another factor. Those are a few other factors to consider. And I think that also backs up that point that the violence was the race war idea, even if it wouldn't have really been a full-blown race war, is something that did fear them white rage and black rage, similarly. Like there was a concern there. All right, so we're going to jump to 1979 or maybe a little bit before it, depending on how this gets broken down, what is known as the Greensboro Massacre. But before we deal with specifically that massacre of the day of, I guess to give people a quick precursor or a quick breakdown of just a very simple one. November 3rd, 1979, there was a rally against the Klan and the Klan by a group of communists. I'm giving a very simple, oversimplified version. In Greensboro, North Carolina, by a group of communists in a primarily black neighborhood. The Klan and the Ku Klux Klan in the area, as well as the American Nazi Party, shows up in caravans and shoots into the crowd and murders, I believe, 5 people. I think injures maybe, I don't quite remember the number. I think like 22 people or something of that nature. And that's what the massacre is in a very simple way. But before we really get into the details and give you actual context of that, Rasul, could you provide, I guess, what were some of the precursors? Who were some of the characters involved in this history? And why are we picking this out? Why pick out Greensboro in relationship to, or why are we picking out Greensboro when there was obviously other massacres like we named? Like, why are we highlighting this?
So this is occurring in 1979. So at this particular point, the Third Klan is now dwindling because of all of the actions of the federal government in response to, Cheney, Goodman, and Swerner, the Liotso, the Birmingham church bombing. Even if some of these examples did not result in an actual sentencing of anybody, it completely decimates the Klan, because not only is it difficult to be a member, it's also difficult to be a member in secret. And so the whole idea of secrecy is completely obstructed because you're now being surveilled heavily. But also it was completely clear now that multiple either informants or agents were inside different Klan dens, and at various levels. So this completely sort of weakens the Klan throughout this particular period of time. Other organizations are growing in the early part and mid part of the 70s, so the Klan is still holding on. So remember, we said North Carolina is Klansville, USA, or is known as that. What's occurring there is a changing sort of economic and political, interest positioning in the state. The Workers' Viewpoint Organization, which was a precursor to the Communist Workers' Party, was beginning to organize textile workers for their wages and their conditions. In particular, the conditions in the textile mills resulted in many of those workers contracting what was known as brown lung, as a disease from sort of working with the dyes or any other type of, chemicals they were overly exposed to. This was also, backed up by the Brown Lung Association and North Carolina Occupational Safety and Health. So the Communist Party, again, the precursor, which was after the Workers' Viewpoint Organization, is growing because of their labor organizing efforts. The next focus of work was with Duke Health, and because Duke University Health was also not properly addressing treatment for those textile workers, much less just working class North Carolinians anyway. And so they're growing in membership, they're growing in actions and activities. And so when you get to 1979 in July, there's a confrontation that takes place between the Federated Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, the FKKK, and the Communist Workers' Party in China Grove in North Carolina, because the Klan themselves were doing a recruitment drive effort by screening the Birth of a Nation movie.
And China Grove is like very close to Greensboro, right?
Very close, very close. So the Klansmen in this particular case were forced to hide in the community center because, again, the Communist Worker Parties had a greater number of, people and greater number of influence.
And they were screening, you said Birth of a Nation. I just want to make sure people hear that part again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, that they were, and that for this particular screening, they also were in competition with the American Nazi Party, who also was, coming at them. And if you think about it, while the protesters of the Communist Worker Party is one thing, another armed paramilitary group like the American Nazi Party is a whole nother thing. And so they weren't prepared to engage in a conflict with them. So some of the, key people that begins to crop up arise from this action, but also in September. So Virgil Griffin, who is over the Invisible Empire, Ku Klux Klan, Harold Covington, who is now the most recent leader of the American Nazi Party, and then Goral Pierce, who is a Grand Dragon of the Federated Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, formed. Then they reconciled and they formed what's known as the United Racist Front.
I'm sorry, man. That got me when I was reading it. That shit is hilarious to me.
Yeah.
Say that again. So again, this is not a parody. This is not a Boondocks episode. The United Racist Front, right?
The URF is a racist front. Is then the first time that then these entities, the Virgil Griffin, Invisible Empire, Ku Klux Klan, alongside Harold Covington, American Nazi Party, and then Goral Pierce, who's the Grand Dragon of the Federated Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Some people may think, well, why is two Klan? No, they're two different entities. They do not agree with each other. That's why one is called the Invisible Empire, Ku Klux Klan, and that's why the other one is called the Federal Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. All Klan are not the same. And so some groups are splinter groups, which means that they may be set, and sometimes a splinter group may mean that they are a rival set. In this case, these are not, friends, they are rivals. A person who's also present there is Bernard Bukovich, who is an agent of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He's undercover.
He's present at the meeting, you're saying?
At the formation of URF, the United Racist Front. October 4th, the Communist Workers' Party then announces a death to the Klan March to be held in Greensboro. And so then October, you start having a flurry of actions and activities. So October 18th, Dawson, who is an informant, met with detectives and the intelligence department for the Greensboro Police Department about what's been happening. So Brett Dawson is an informant inside the Communist Workers' Party. So basically all these entities are being investigated with informants or agents, all of these organizations, both on, that are represented here. So the American Nazi Party, the Klan, the two clans, the Communist Worker Party. And so Dawson is the person that's assigned to the Communist Workers' Party. And he's noting to the Greensboro Police Department that this Communist Workers' Party seems very hostile. Then the next day, so that was October 18th, October 19th, Dawson then reports further findings to the Greensboro Police Department that the Klan also was planning to attend the November 3rd rally. And so everybody was becoming aware of that. And so Dawson was noting that people were, as we now sometimes call, tooling up, so they were beginning to create preparations of defense, self-defense for themselves. October 20th, the Invisible KKK held a march and rally in Lincoln County, small rally, about 80 people. And Dawson, who is the agent from the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, is the featured speaker and provides a speech encouraging the Klan to confront the Communist Workers' Parties. Again, just for people to follow, he is an agent undercover for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms,
which is a federal agency,
right?
Yeah.
So
federal.
this is what we call probably in the present day entrapment, basically. So because he's creating, inciting the actual circumstances that would come about. October 22nd, according to later on testimony, Dawson also contacts the FBI and to let them know that the Communist Workers' Party, as well as the Revolutionary Communist Workers' Party, who is not present. They're a completely different organization. He informs the FBI that they're the same organization. Basically putting the Communist Worker Party that's in North Carolina on a more serious list than what they might have been on. October 23rd, which is then the next day, the Greensboro FBI opens then an investigation on Communist Workers' Parties because of that notice by Dawson. But the FBI superiors, denied that such an investigation began to take place. The United Racist Front holds a meeting in Winston-Salem to, rally up nearby members because, of course, they thought that their local membership may not be enough to deal with the issue. October 28th, another Klan meeting, just a Klan-only meeting, was held in Lincoln County. Dawson urges the Klansmen to attack Communist Worker Party. Again, what we can understand to probably be entrapment, but attacks, he's encouraging them to attack the Communist Worker Party on this November 3rd march that's going to be upcoming. And he's the one that Dawson is the one that designs the flyers with lynching imagery and puts them up. So in response to the death to the Klan March flyers that the Communist Worker Party had put up. October 31st, Dawson reports to the Greensboro Police Department lieutenant and obtains a copy of the parade permit for the Communist Worker Party. So now the police have a sense of the route that the Communist Worker Party is going to go down for the march. The permit includes that information, the meeting point, how many people were going to be present, any stops, and so forth. And so basically, people in the police department was then able to get information to the United Racist Front knowledge about the march. The location, the route, the numbers of people, and everything. Dawson attends a press conference.
Real quick, wasn't Dawson also an FBI informant?
Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Okay, because in Bring the War Home.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Bukovic is alcohol, tobacco.
Yeah, then there was two agents, and
Dawson is the FBI.
Yeah, yes. Okay. Just want to make sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Dawson is the one that's embedded in the Communist Workers' Party. Bukovic is the one that's embedded in the United Racist Front.
Now Dawson was a Klansman.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm getting a bunch of things confused.
Yeah, Dawson was I'm gonna just read. Split off by Eddie Dawson, a longtime Klansman and sometime FBI informant. She said they grabbed guns and informed a caravan of cars. This is a little. I don't want to jump ahead, but so he was an FBI agent. But then there was also the Bureau for alcohol, tobacco,
expiring.
Yeah, and so they were both agents. There were agents in the Communist Party, but she talks about those two were both agents from two different divisions of the federal government.
Right.
Both agents inside the Klan.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then November 2nd, then you got Griffin. So Griffin, I think, is who I'm probably confusing with, because of course you start getting confused with who's in what. Mm-hmm. Griffin is in the third party that's sort of associated with some of these activities, but he's not an informant. He's a head of Invisible Empire, KKK.
Virgil Griffin.
Yeah, Virgil Griffin. He's the one that is kind of partnering with Dawson a lot, attending meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So Griffin addresses the URF, Lincoln County, again for the next day. So that entire night, the URF is prepping for their response. And again, most of this is covered in Elizabeth Wheaton's codename Green Kill, the 1979 Greensboro killings, as well as Sin Waller. Sin Waller is the wife of one of the victims, Love and Revolution, a political memoir, People's History of the Greensboro Massacre. That's her book. And so that's the sort of things that set up. Then what ends up happening on November 3rd, 1979, a caravan of the Klansmen and the Nazis, then nine. So they drive through the Morningside Homes, which was a black housing project in Greensboro. And there, the Klan rally that's been organized by the Communist Party was about to get, underway, getting to move down. And then immediately a confrontation erupts, and the Klan and Nazi gunmen open fire. And again, this is broad daylight, so people can see this on, there is a video clip of this actually happening live. This was all filmed, as it was happening, either by journalists or people who were part of the march. They were recording it. And immediately assailants gunned down 5 young, people who were part of, these activities. Again, the cameras just roll throughout the thing, so you're going to see people dying in it. So it's not it's not clipped in any particular way. It's the full.
It's just running. Yeah.
You can still look up that footage.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. As long as you can find the originals, people have clipped it themselves, but it's just yeah.
And when we say shooting, I'm saying again, people are 3 feet, 2 feet away from each other, just running and and shooting, at a person, and a person just falls.
And this is where I'm gonna be a little critical of the communists. They weren't prepared from anything I had read. That there was a few of them that might have had guns, but most of them left them in their car.
Yeah, but most of them had
a rally called "Death to the Klan," and, and then a lot of them had billy clubs, because that's what when you said they attacked earlier. When they attacked the Klan earlier, that's what they used, was clubs and bats and stuff. They didn't actually, use any guns or pistol whip anybody or anything like that. So they were at death to the rally, death to the Klan rally, and they weren't acting properly. Again, this is not to justify their deaths by any stretch. I'm just saying this is a good side lesson to have for people who, if you're gonna take it there, you don't, and this is not about, adventurism. I'm saying you don't leave people vulnerable like that. If you're gonna have something called Death to the Klan rally, you need to, that wasn't the brightest. I just want to note that.
Yeah, and so 10 a.m., Dawson goes home, talks to Detective Cooper on the phone, tells him about the, imminent violence. Besides the location in which they were killed was the Morningside homes. The Klansmen themselves were gathered in front of the Fletcher homes. 10:25 a.m., Dawson is the one that gives the orders to move out and leads the sort of car caravan. Again, 9 cars, and 11:06, the Klan caravan, waits at the interstate ramp. Also, just for listeners, there are maps of this entire thing that you can sort of look up, and you can have a sense geographically where things were happening, all within this small location within Greensboro.
And the police, you might have already said it, maybe I just missed it, but the police were not present to protect the...
They were not present to protect marchers, even though the Communist Worker Party specifically filled out a permit to have a march, which is typically what happens with marches, is that when you fill out a permit, that comes with a police detail, either officially or unofficially. So unfortunately, 4 people were killed at the site of the Morningside homes. Sandra Neely Smith, Cesar Cose, James Waller, and Bill Sampson. Michael Nathan was shot and he died 2 days later. So he becomes the 5th person that's killed. He dies on November 5th. They say up to about 11 others were wounded. Some say up to about 20. And again, there's extensive footage of the entire ambush that shows all this. This entire incident is a convergence of multiple entities. The Communist Worker Party, as I said, and they're the ones who have the 4 of the 5 victims. Their members are the ones who died. The Greensboro Justice Fund and the Greensboro Civil Rights Fund were consisting of partners of those who were killed that day, some of which of those partners were present that day, as well as several of the survivors of the massacre are parts of these 2 entities. The Christic Institute was a public interest law firm that represented Sarah Nelson, William Davis, and other particular. Well, these are previous cases that they handled, and they represented then the families of those who were slain. Organizations that supported the civil rights suit were everything from the Racial Justice Working Group of the National Council of Churches, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Congressional Black Caucus, the National Anti-Klan Network, which is an organization that was created in 1979. And then, of course, the FBI was present, both officially and unofficially.
Internally, yeah. Internally present, yeah.
So, Edward Lewis is a Klansman and informant for the FBI from 1970 to 1977. He had been involved in the Klan. So this also speaks to why you hear what he's doing. He's not an agent. He's an informant in this regard. Lynn Bogarty is an FBI special agent that's been assigned to Greensboro and was the contact for Dawson, to the FBI agency. And then you have other sort of FBI agents. There's also the Greensboro Police Department. I mentioned Detective Cooper. Cooper was the officer that Dawson also was in communication with and had been part of the police department since 1966. He was assigned to the Special Investigation Squad that looked into all of this. and then the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They were also present, and they were represented by Bernard Bukovic, who was then the undercover informant who infiltrated the Forsyth County unit of the American Nazi Party. And his cover was being a long distance trucker. So this explained why his disappearance, might have been at one point, or where he was coming from, or why he had access to certain things. And then, of course, the groups that were present, even though we said that the Invisible Empire, the Ku Klux Klan was present, and then the Federated Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, as well as the American Nazi Party, but also the North Carolina Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, which is a whole separate entity, was present. The United Klans of America was present. The Wilmington-based Rights of White People was present. Some, other random neo-Nazis were present. And of course, there were various people of numerous ranks within the different Klan-based organizations that were evident there. This was one of the things that both created a further stain on the Klan after its own decline in the 70s, but this was beginning of the sort of communication lines across different, white power.
Yeah, white power, what become white power, yeah.
Yeah. And
so was anybody held accountable for any of this?
So many of the anti-Klan protesters who were killed and injured, some of them who were also held somewhat accountable. So in addition to
the anti-Klan protesters were held accountable?
Yes.
But the Klan Cosby's weren't.
In some cases, they were tagging on that previous activities of these groups alongside their anti-Klan activity at this Greensboro Act. So some of the anti-Klan protesters were a part of the campaign to free the Wilmington 10, who were a group of, 9 young men and one woman who were wrongfully convicted in 1971 in Wilmington for arson and conspiracy. Some of those protesters were also part of the campaign to free the Charlotte Three. And, the Charlotte Three were T.J. Reddy, James Grant, and Charles Parker, who were arrested for and convicted in Charlotte, North Carolina, for the burning of Lazy B stables, a horse stable. And so because of that, some of them were held accountable because it was seen as if this was a continuation of their propensity for hostility. And if you remember, I also mentioned that the informant mentioned that the Communist Workers' Party was actually the same organization as the Revolutionary Communist Workers' Party.
Right. So accountable is relative here.
Yeah. I'm not saying, they were sentenced to, a crime. But for all we see, especially because the Klan, the leadership of the Klan came present, for many of the trials. The Klan itself seemed to have gotten off very much, scot-free, unblemished in some cases in the state, but blemished beyond the state. But it still does set into motion the further decline. And so how I see it is that while it does not end the Klan, it sets up why the Klan ends in 1981. Because by this particular point, people are completely sick of the Klan's activities, not necessarily of the Klan's views, but the Klan's activities. And so in 1981, what ends up happening is that Michael Donald in Mobile, Alabama, is abducted, kidnapped, beaten to death, and then killed, and then his body is left hanging in a neighborhood, on a neighborhood tree across the street from a house of the Klan members who killed him as they were having a house party. So they were able to go out into the porch while they were drinking beers to look at his body hanging from the tree. That case completely results in not only a major sort of arrest, leading to even one Klans member being sentenced to the death penalty or receiving the death penalty, which was completely unheard of. But a civil lawsuit was filed on behalf of Michael Donald's mother, Donald, with the assistance of the Southern Poverty Law Center, where the United Klans of America was bankrupt because of that lawsuit, because she won $7 million in the verdict. And the United Klan just did not have the resources just to pay it all entirely from bank accounts and so forth. So they had to sell their compound, other properties, their investments, and so forth. And without the United Klans of America, there was no national Klan entity. After that, they were strong dens, they were strong dominions, but there were no longer a national Klan to sort of rally all of them. And this is what I would say is the third Klan. I think we alluded to it, but yeah, there's just not a lot of good books on the third Klan. And so it's hazy to think about when the official end of the third Klan, but that's what we can sort of look at is the third Klan definitely, completely dissolves if we maintain the whole notion of a national Klan being the deciding factor of the existence. And so when we think of a fourth Klan and setting up, our next episode, we have to begin after this 1981 incident.
That's going to be interesting. That's going to be dope.
Yeah, again,
The fourth.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say for that fourth wave, or when you guys record that, I think, of course, I would like to be present. But yeah, I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, because there's a lot we held back on today, so we could have content for that.
Yeah, it just give you a sense to Henry Francis Hayes is the lead person who killed Michael Donald. He's electrocuted. Again, we received the death penalty and it was actually enacted. John Llewellyn Knowles spent most of his life in prison, and then I forgot who the third person was, but the third person is the person who then became the informant, not the informant, but the person who, and what do they call that in terms of receiving a lesser sentence? But basically, he's the one that points the finger at Hayes and Knowles.
He pleaded out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that incident is just terrible that what they did to that woman's son. But yeah, I think, like you said, that defunds the Klan. That's actually took a few years, right, to actually get that lawsuit through. So it wasn't actually 1981.
Yeah, so 1981 is when he's killed, and right. So 1985.
Yeah.
I think it's 85 though.
Okay.
I think 85 is when the criminal case ends, and then 1987 is the civil.
Okay, yeah. So that happens then, but as we'll get to in the next episode, even as that is occurring, there's this other thing brewing, that because what that, like you already pretty much said, like the unification, again, we have people calling themselves a United Racist Front, which I, have to laugh at, even though it's a serious thing, but like the unification and then the ideological switch that occurs shortly after that is important to understanding what we come to understand like the white power movement.
Right.
We've already alluded to the kind of anti-government sense that was occurring even earlier in the century, but that becomes much more explicit in the next episode. For those who are more interested in like today, quote unquote, you got to really look through that era. And there's some crazy shit. You think y'all heard some crazy shit in this when you get into. I mean, you got gun runners for the CIA and all kinds of like white supremacists that are funded by the government and all kinds of crazy shit. So, there's some other stuff to get into there. But yeah, I hope the Greensboro Massacre. I was just in North Carolina actually, so it was interesting to be reading about that, and just because we kind of rushed through it. There's other details with all white jury, a lot of the anti-communism. We'll really talk, maybe kind of pick up with it there. The anti-communism in that is also important to understanding the white power movement, maybe even sometimes more than the so-called anti-blackness. The anti-communism runs really deep. So yeah, unless there's anything else to say, we can close it out there. I don't know how long we've been on here. But you can check out whatever doesn't make it on, if you're listening to this on Spotify or YouTube, whatever doesn't make it on that, there will be a uncut version, like with every detail, if you're really interested in the history, on Patreon. So please check that out. Please sign up to Patreon. Y'all have been showing love with this series on Patreon, so please continue to follow it. And we'll be back for the next episode and hopefully the final one. Myth that white supremacy equals white unity, which will be an interesting discussion. So peace out, everybody. Thanks, Rasul, once again for breaking all that down and walking us through all the history.
Peace.
Okay. Fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them.